Lately I've been getting a lot of questions about input to the gun. Here's one we'll talk through, and then I've got a couple guns to explain. I find the biggest issue I've had is the triggers that pull through and break a bit more progressively keep me from applying as much input versus a defined wall. My brain wants to use that defined wall as a specific point to apply input pressure. So, what he's saying is, well, this is like one of the nicest triggers. So this would be an apex trigger on M&P. So you press the trigger, it's got, like this mush or take up, you get to the defined, very defined wall, then not much input, and then it breaks. So it's pretty light, it's pretty crisp. The same thing can be set up the Walther PDP trigger. A good angle. Not much here, just straight to the wall, then it breaks. So what he's saying is he gets to a trigger like this, he wants to, once he feels that wall, wants to push down or give input, compared to, well, this would be, these are my top 3 favorite triggers, at least for guns I have, compared to this guy. So this is a tactical trigger in a Glock 47. The difference on this one is it has a rolling style break. So this one's pretty good, where the poundage doesn't really increase. Some guns will be, let's say, you're pressing through at like 2 pounds, then you use 5 pounds of pressure, then it slides a little bit, and then it gets lighter, and then you have like another wall, or like kind of more defined walls against it, so it's not really smooth. This one's super smooth, so you just keep like ramping up the pressure, and at some point it goes off. So what he's saying is pressing a trigger like this is easier, just because when you decide to press the trigger, I just roll on pressure, and it just kind of slides along as I increase the pressure until it breaks, compared to a trigger like this, where I want to do the same thing, where I just, at one point, I'm not touching the trigger, and then I just press the trigger until it breaks. But for most people, when they feel that wall, they want to stop and then press into it more. When they do that, it's some amount of inputting into the gun. All right. So the question is how to work through that. He says his brain wants to use that defined wall as a specific point to add input pressure. So, like I said, a lot of comments around kind of inputting and what too much, not enough. I'm of the opinion probably less is more, because, well, all these guns, polymer or metal framed, they don't kick a ton. Ideally, all you want to do is just, it's not like a broken record at this point, hold the gun in your hands to the point that it doesn't slip or move around, laser focus where you want bullets to go, and then just try to press the trigger without having, applying pressure with part of your hand or trying to stop the gun from recoiling. You just look where you want bullets to go and try your best to let the gun do its thing as you just manage recoil and look where you want bullets to go. The hardest part is when people know that recoil is coming, they want to do some amount of stop it, or either to prevent the gun from recoiling, to manage the recoil. If you're shooting, you see the dot start to lift, you want to push and help the dot get back down to the target quickly, which of course isn't going to be helpful, but in the moment when that's happening, especially at distance. So for example, let's say when you shoot rapid fire pairs, the sight moves about like this, not that big of a deal. So on a 7-yard target, it's still inside the A zone, no big deal. Then back up to 20, 25 yards, and this little bit of movement, all of a sudden the sight is going over the top of the target. What you should actually do, as far as any change you should make, is nothing. No difference in change. Laser focus where you want the bullets to go. Don't input on the gun, because if you're holding the gun, whatever way you hold it, and you're doing the rapid fire pairs, not inputting, you're noticing at close distance the shots are stacking. Well, at farther distance, of course, variance is going to, let's say if you're an inch off at 10 yards, that's going to be that little bit of variance is going to show up more at 20 yards, but still, the same rules apply. You just laser focus where you want the bullets to go. Try your best to press the trigger without inputting the gun, whether shoving down, trying to add extra force, or anything like that. The problem is, like this person pointed out, these triggers get to be light, and you know where the point's going to be, so to make you go now when you get to that point, as opposed to a rolling break that, let's say I don't know exactly when it's going to break. Not some point it's a negligent discharge. But if you just keep applying pressure, at some point it will go off, but not so much in the way that you're going now. So that's what this person's fighting. I'll say all 3 of these guns. So The Apex trigger, the Walther Dynamic Performance, and the Tactical trigger are, as far as favorites go, those three are my favorite triggers. They're the nicest, lightest, whatever, the most choice. But they're all different, but I shoot them all the same. And so I'll talk about how my process works. It's like at one point, I'm not touching the trigger. Then when I decide to press the trigger, I'm just going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just keep rolling pressure into the trigger. For this gun, you'd see the trigger shoe moving as I'm rolling in pressure, just stacking on the pressure. Let's be real, this is probably the nicest factory trigger there is. Walther Dynamic Performance trigger. On this one, yeah, it's a little short amount of take-up, not much. It's pretty light, pretty crisp. I'm going to actually use the same process I used in that other gun. I'm not touching it. That's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at one point, I start like touching the trigger, and then I just roll on pressure, and at some point, it's going to go off. The Apex, clearly another favorite. You guys love these, especially for M&P, but it's the same thing. This one maybe has, if we're comparing the two, let's say the Apex maybe has a tick more travel before you get to the wall. So if you shot them a bunch, it's little like nuances different, but either way, it's gonna be the same thing. It's like I'm not pressing the trigger. At some point, I'll contact the trigger shoe, and I just keep rolling pressure into it. So even though these are all super nice triggers, I'm going to treat these the same way as if I'd treat a factory Glock pistol with just the 5-pound trigger, 5.5 or 4.5 or whatever, the factory guts and connector and all that stuff, and factory shoe, all that stuff. It's going to be the exact same process. At one point you're touching the trigger, and then you're not touching the trigger. When you decided to press the trigger, you just keep rolling on pressure. So it's nice this person's aware of this input and breaks it a bit more progressively, keeps them from applying as much input versus a defined wall. You want to get to the point where you don't have a preference for what the trigger is or isn't, or how the trigger breaks or anything along those lines. I think the best drill for this one is trigger control at speed. So I talked about this one before here. The drill is the gun's aimed at the target, finger is just out of contact with the trigger. Once you react to a random beep, you're going to press the trigger all the way through. The goal is, I think of it as stacking pressure or rolling on pressure. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even if it's let's say it's a 3-pound trigger, it'd still be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Keep rolling on the pressure, not so much that I'm thinking like not pressing the trigger or press part way, like press. I don't like that because that kind of attributes this problem this guy's talking about, where I'll press the trigger part of the way, do some more aiming, and then press the rest. So regardless of trigger system, the technique's going to stay the same for this drill. And you can do a couple different variations. You could do where your finger's just kind of lightly touching the trigger, but not really putting a lot of pressure into it. Finger out of contact with the trigger, kind of all the way forward in the front of the trigger guard, and finger alongside the frame or the trigger guard. The farther you get your finger away from the trigger to press the trigger, it's going to be that much tougher because it gives you more opportunity to want to influence the gun as your finger travels more. But regardless of the system, it's light trigger, heavy trigger, double action, single action. I should have grabbed a DASA gun. But the process is going to be the same. Even if I'm grabbing one of my Tanfoglios, so a double action, single action gun, to be the same thing. Not touching the trigger, and then I decide to press the trigger, it's just going to roll through that. Or if it was single action, when the trigger's on single action, there'll be some amount of like travel before it gets to the wall, and I'll just be not touching the trigger, and then I just roll through the pressure and press until the gun goes off. There's a few different other, I don't know, I'll talk about one other listener question to kind of tie in here, where it's kind of related to this. It's like input. So the kind of cut to the chase. The question is, it seems like there are some problems I can only repair under live fire. For example, I can run a lot of trigger control at speed in dry fire with what feels like a solid grip. But once I'm on the range, the grip breaks down under recoil, especially with involuntary tensing of my firing hand. So he knows he's doing it, and the gun wants to go off, and he wants to clamp and push on the gun. One thing I've been trying is loading a round, dropping the mag, and firing a double. When the second shot would normally break, I feel my head tense and drive the gun down and left as my fingers move sympathetically with my trigger finger. After a few reps, I can consciously stop it and shoot a few clean pairs. The problem is, even when I move back to normal doubles and deliberately keep my attention on the issue, the tension still comes back. So it feels like an ingrained reflex that fires off even when I'm trying to stay conscious of it. What do you think about the single shot double drill for this? Do you have any other method for breaking this habit that pushes through even when I'm actively focused on the correction? So what this person's saying, so loaded mag in, chamber it, remove the magazine, aim the target, do doubles, so like 2 trigger presses. On the first shot, you're going to need a bang. On the second shot, you're going to need a click. And on the click, the second shot, he's trying not to push into the gun or, influence the gun. I've seen people do this. I like it and I don't. I'll explain why. If you're doing this and you're like pushing way down, or you feel your shoulders go up, head goes down, something crazy, obviously that's a problem. However, the point to understand is that something is needed to return the gun when you fire a pair. I'm not going to say it's much, but let's say it's this much, like an inch of movement. So if I'm firing rapid fire pairs, I go, and it like dives just an inch or so low. That might be what would be needed to return the gun if you're firing live ammo, as opposed to just holding the gun completely still, which maybe then would go high. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but it's important to understand there is some amount needed to return the gun. So if you're doing this drill and you can feel in the second shot, you're cranking on the gun really hard, that would be a problem. However, if it just moves, I don't know, maybe this much or just a little bit, that might be what's needed to return the gun after you'd fire a shot with live ammo. So it's kind of like, I like it, but I don't. If it's super telling and you feel like a big problem, then yeah, do it. Otherwise, not so much. So the trigger control at speed drill, going back to that I discussed, you can do that with dry and live fire. Either finger like just touching the trigger, but not really applying pressure, out of contact, all the way forward the trigger guard, outside the trigger guard, alongside the frame. Any of those variances is good. You can do that with dry and live fire, but there's ways to cheat the drill. For example, let's say I'm doing this, it goes beep. That's not really going to induce the same issue, beep, as go beep, and I'm trying to like immediately mash through it without influencing the gun at all. So that's the important part to do that drill correctly. It has to be immediate. Another drill I really like for marksmanship, it's kind of fun, calls one progressive return drill. What you're going to do is fire one shot, you have an aiming reference, fire one shot and just observe the way the gun tracks back. Then fire 2, so bop, bop. Then 3, 1, 2, 3. Then 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on to 5 shots. So 15 rounds with a pause between each one. So bop, 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 4, then 5. What you'll notice is your input typically changes. 3 is tough enough, but in 4 and 5, typically most people struggle the most there with input. While they're firing, especially like the 4th, 5th shot, they'll start to either push down the gun or you'll see it kind of like they follow the sight up or whatever. The inputs change and you'll just notice the gun bouncing around a lot more and you'll have more kind of flyers. That's a good thing to work on tension. And while you're doing that drill, really focus on the feelings in your firing hand. You kind of only think about one thing at a time. And while doing this, yeah, it's important to be target focused. Yeah, support hand on the gun's important, but I think you should place your primary focus on your firing hand, trying your best to press the trigger straight without having your hand clamp down or push into the gun. So while you do that drill, either the trigger control at speed or that progressive return, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 shot strings, the pause in between after the fifth 5-round string, like hold shift for a second if you need to, relax, change mags. Most guns have 15-round magazines, and then try the drill again. So you can only think about one thing, thinking your best about your firing hand, but understanding if you're doing those doubles where it's like rapid fire pairs, but there's no round chamber for the second one, just a little bit of input is actually needed to return the gun. However, it's not going to be, a ton. It's very subtle. So I'd like to say there's an end to this kind of input thing or trigger control thing, unfortunately, as you get better, you'll just want to work on it more. The little like issues will just become more and more nuanced, and like maybe it's less and less worse, but it'd be something you'll kind of always want to revisit and always want to get better at. I don't think there's really ever a point where you've got it mastered and you're ready to work on to a different concept. It's kind of like target focus, just something that's always a work in progress. So hopefully this helpful. Gives you something to think about. If you have questions, drop them below. I do my best to read through the questions, answer them if I can, just with a sentence or two. If something takes more to talk about, I'll just record a video. So like, share, subscribe, all that nonsense. Appreciate you watching, and I hope you have a good day.